many years, I remember people talking about that image of Emmett Till, his face, his misshapen face, in the pages of Jet magazine, and how it seared into the consciousness of so many people who actually saw that story and remember that story. Who on the panel remembers clearly that time and when they saw the image of Emmett Till's face, his body in Jet magazine? RB.
Well, when I got old enough to understand, I mean, I used to visit North Carolina as a child growing up, so I understood the racist, overt segregationist race. I mean, I remember riding the train and changing cars at Washington, D.C., and I remember there was a whole different tone and attitude and the whole concept of being uppity, because I had experience when I was about 9 or 10, a little white playmate that my aunt worked for at the house as a domestic. He told me when I was about 9, he said, "You can't eat at the table with us anymore because we're white and you're not." And he said, "You have to do what I say because I'm white." We were like 9, 10. And so I cussed him up and down, and I never saw him again. I never went over there again. And, but, you know, I could feel what Emmett Till went through.
Avalon?
I'm 45, so
No, you're not right, so we're going to say that.
I learned of the death of Emmett Till when learning of the assassination of Medgar Evers, and I was angry. I was angry with Byron Dale Beckwith for the injustice and the pain that he caused Merle Evers and her family, and I'm still angry that Brian and Milam died not taking responsibility for such a heinous act.
Dr. Martin.
The most powerful statement for me with the death of Emmett Till occurred in 1994 when we unveiled our exhibit at the museum, "And a Little Child Shall Lead Them, Black Youth in the Struggle." And we look at children from the era of slavery who fought to free themselves. We look at children, the Scottsboro Boys, Cheney Goodwin, Schwerner, children on the front lines of battle during the Civil Rights struggle who began singing one day in the tune of the "We Shall Overcome, We Are Not Afraid," and eventually began wearing signs that said that. And I was shrine to Emmett Till. And in that part of our exhibit, what I was able to do was to introduce to a generation of young people the story of Emmett Till, a story that they knew absolutely nothing about. And I was able to say to them, whether you're black or white, the death of Emmett Till created a movement so great, so strong, that Emmett Till's death gave you a new life. And you owe it to Emmett Till to make the most you can of that new life. And as also in connections with exhibits at the museum, when we unveiled our exhibit on lynching, I went to Florida. "What's your lynching story?" And he looked at me and said, "Oh child, all black people got a lynching story." So in that connection, it's for me what the death of Emmett Till says, not about the past, but about the future.
Rod Willis.
I'm from Portsmouth, Virginia, and wherein segregation in Virginia wasn't quite as bad. I learned about Emmett Till at an early age. My mother and father preached. They did not appreciate, with all due respect to white folks who are here, but they did warn me that we didn't have ordinances in Virginia. You had to get off of the sidewalk. The white folks came down the street, especially a white woman. And I lived in fear in a totally segregated town for white people. White man walked through your neighborhood. He was the insurance man or a man collecting a bill. You could go all across my town and never see a white person unless you were paying a bill. So everything was segregated. So I lived in fear and respect of white folks and thought that I would do something to change it. I grew up with learning of Emmett Till and probably never saw a picture of him until I was 16. But Emmett Till was brought up at the dinner table on a regular basis. Now, what did that do to me? It sort of made me want to get into the civil rights movement. But it also told me, let's fast forward 24 years. So I'm 55 in October. I have a son, and he was raised in Fairfax, Virginia. And at the time, this is around 1979, 83, people would like to think that things had changed, but for all practical purposes, not much has changed in America because the great problem that has never been discussed or resolved in America is race. So he's born and raised in a separated society, and I lived with the same fear, living near white folks, that somehow that same neurosis that I had about dealing with white folks would come to the surface. And lo and behold, he had a similar experience almost happen to him. He was running for president of the student government. He ran against a white person, and the principal of the school confronted my ex-wife and I, and somehow convinced the rest of the folk that we had gone in some kind of conspiracy. He was a very popular person, to take over their school and take over the election. And took one of the badges of the little white girl and took one of the campaign signs of my son and tore it up in front of his face. This is when he was about 6 years old, and I was convinced, and he was convinced, that if I can destroy his will to be president of this student government, he'll never want to be president of the United States. And basically, he accused my son of flirting with the white girls in the school. So all of the neuroses and fears that I had when I was 5 and going through my teens came back, and I think this whole issue is still relevant because nobody wanted to talk about the fact that in Anne Arundel County, about a year ago, a similar situation happened. A brother was extremely great athlete, was dating white girls. Nobody talked about that at the trial, but the people that did him in were acquitted. So how far has America really come? And I want to believe in my Christian ethics that things in America have changed, but in reality, they're just about where they were, and I don't think we've made that much progress on this issue.
That's probably the perfect segue for us opening up the discussion to the audience. The point is that the murder of Emmett Till happened in between the Brown versus Board of Education decision and the Montgomery bus boycott sparked by the civil disobedience of Rosa Parks. But as Rod stated, and Rod did cover that case down in Anne Arundel County, a very similar situation just happened last year, right here in Maryland. So given that statement, who do we... Tom, do you want them to come to the microphone?
Yeah, they can come to this mic.
First of all, to the panelists, moderator, hello everybody, how you doing? All right. My heart is filled to see so many folk out here today for this film. A lot of times we go to things that are related to African people, very few people show up, so give yourself a round of applause for coming out and hearing our story. The question is to the panel, is that I think we all feel as African folk born in this country, and how the story of Emmett Till pierces our spirit and our soul so much, is that our lives as hard-working black folks in this country on which the economic stability of this country was made is just diminished, reduced to basically nothing. So I want to say to you, do you believe that the reason for Emmett Till, and even today, and when an African woman is kidnapped, an African child is missing, a black man shows up missing, nothing is hardly said unless people get on the internet and create a blog to say, hey, a black woman is missing who was pregnant, not a blonde white woman in Aruba, that life is worth just as much.
Okay, first of all, we live in a white supremacist society which dictates by culture and until very recently by law that black life is not worth what a white life is worth. One of our major problems is that the terrorism that was used against Emmett Till is used in more subtle forms now. I talk to prominent, middle class, upper class black men in this town about various issues, and they're scared to death. They're as afraid as the people in this film were down in Mississippi. Now they have more money, they may have a position in the government or whatever, they're still intimidated because they believe that they will be punished by the white power structure in this town. The racism that affected the people in this film is more subtle today. Okay, Baltimore is a white supremacist town, and all you have to do is go on Gay Street and see that instead of throwing Emmett Till in the river now, they have on Gay Street in the juvenile, they call it Justice Center.
Or Central Book.
Okay? Okay, it's the same kind of terror, the same kind of intimidation, and it cuts across class lines, and now they have more people that look like us to do the terrorism, but it's still controlled by white supremacy.
Do we want to
Counsel?
Do we want to go down the
I
line?
would say first to you as an attorney, that was a bad question. I'm not sure if that was 4 questions or 3 questions, but I'm going to do my best to answer them.
I will greatly appreciate that, Counsel.
Thank you. With regard to trying to be quote-unquote equal to Caucasians, I think that's a misperception that is the crutch of much of our history. We need not be equal. My opinion is that I am better to the extent that I am able to overcome. So I seek not to be equal with anyone, not even another black. We are individuals, and when we understand that each of us have something to offer, we must deal with race. However, I don't need to assimilate with white women in order to be have high self-esteem. I want to talk about race because race is an issue. And I do not consider myself a racist. I work for a white man, but all of the clients that we service are African American, black, and if you have a heart, it precedes race. And that's what's missing because we have black on black crime that we really need to be discussing and trying to do something about.
I just have a real concise question about the silence of President Eisenhower during that time within this context in terms of white supremacy and what that does to Caucasians in terms of silencing them just not to repudiate injustice or to advocate for justice in general. I'm not saying all folks, and I'm not defending them either. But if the panel could just address the idea of
Dr. Mitchell with white supremacy. Address that.
The issue for me, Bill, is silence on the part of our leaders. We misread John F. Kennedy, for example, who remained very silent on the whole issue of civil rights, straddled the fence as long as he could, stayed on one side of the fence and hid from the issues. We have a president of the United States who was a card-carrying member of the KKK. And Eisenhower, who came from the war and was lionized for that, but did not come into the trenches to fight against the struggle for civil rights and the struggle for justice in this country. The most frightening silence for me, however, is the cultural amnesia that we sometimes face as a people. If someone is going to tell us what our stories can be and how we can tell them. We get, in 1997, when we unveiled our lynching exhibit at the museum, we were roundly criticized. But what was important to me was that I had teenagers who came into the museum in 1997 who said that they never heard of lynching, that they didn't know that there was such a thing. We are supposed to tell our slave shippers if we got on a Tom Joyner morning cruise, and not that we were in the hold and in the belly of a beast. And so, anytime there is silence, wherever it comes from, then those stories and of those people who need to be respected because of their struggle, they get short shrift. And when our leaders, when we elect leaders who can so very much disrespect us, whether it's send us in large numbers into wars, or whether it's people who pretend that our rights don't exist and should not, then we have a problem that we have to address as a people.
Next question.
Thank you, panel. If Emmett were alive today, you and I would be about the same age, a couple months difference. And I remember in early adolescence following that story with shock and horror. But there was also another story around the same time, the saga of Matt Parker, who died an especially grisly lynching death. And I always wondered why the saga of Matt Parker didn't capture the imagination of the country the way that of Emmett Till did. Perhaps he didn't have an advocate as powerful as Emmett's mother.
That's actually the first time I've ever heard that story. Do you know that?
First of all, I don't know who was it? What was his name?
Matt Parker,
Matt Parker.
who was lynched. And there was an especially grisly description in the press. The witnesses of his being dragged from the cell where he's being held, his head bumping on the steps as they dragged him out to lynch him. I'll never forget that image.
Well, I think that the bottom line is the reason Emmett Till's story resonates so deeply and scars so many people was because of the grotesque image that was projected with the photograph and the open casket. See, we live in a society, and the media is primarily responsible for generating it, for you as a public and consumers have a lot of power. Recently, BET dropped its nightly news because they figure Negroes don't need to know news. It is now owned by Viacom, and a few people were upset for a couple of days, and then it was business as usual. Just as it was business as usual as when the brothers murderers were acquitted out in Anne Arundel County. I heard discussions in Baltimore for 3 days, and we're going to protest, and we're going to go down to Anne Arundel County and show them white folks in front of the court how we feel. And next thing I know, they back up in the bar, drinking liquor and talking trash. So the point that I am making is we have very short memories. The images that are projected by the media are graphic, and they sort of tell you what's important. So if there were not a grotesque picture or image that was stained in somebody's mind that they can see, people forget it. So it's important for us to shape our own images, control our own stories. I was up in the press box, I'm going to make this brief, a couple of nights ago when the Ravens, I forgot who they were playing, one of the preseason games that they lost. There was two Jewish guys sitting to my immediate left from ESPN. And somebody was talking about a silent auction where Bob Feller's jersey, he's a baseball player, probably going to go into the Hall of Fame, was going to sell for $50,000. And one Jew said to another, I'm going to bid on that. The guy said, man, don't bid on that. Bob Feller was a racist. He said a lot of negative things about Jewish people, and I wouldn't spend one red cent, and I'm going to tell my son, don't spend, I'm going to tell him about the racist he is. Other people in this country are not apologetic about telling people about who their enemies are and about their history. Black people are the only folk I know in the world who forget what you did to them yesterday and are going to tell you, that you are too sensitive when you talk about slavery, lynching, or the Middle Passage, and we're resurrecting slavery and preaching hate. I'm not Louis Farrakhan, but I ain't stupid either. And some of our leaders have been telling us that we need to teach our own children our history so that they can have a sense of righteous indignation in the same way that these two Jewish fellows determined ultimately that they were not going to bid on Longfellow's jersey because he was a racist and he had anti-Semitic leanings, and this is a white boy who's been dead a long time. So even at the smallest inkling that there was some racially charged or something that was going to discredit Jewish people as a people, and they were collectively decided they were not going to support it, black folk have to do the same thing. We got to teach our children our history and teach them to be proud and teach them to be upset when somebody is acquitted for killing one of our boys.
We're going to go to the next question.
My question is, when I listened to that, look at the video, and it looked like the case was a bizarre expression of justice for that city of Mississippi. I was wondering if the panel, anyone knew, did they bring up any like state charges or maybe civil charges against the state of Mississippi? If they did or if they not, if anyone answered it. I hope I didn't put nobody on the spot.
Well, at the time, the Eisenhower administration was very, very reluctant to get involved in any kinds of civil rights issues. I mean, it was with reluctance that he sent troops to Little Rock and that kind of thing. So, for political reasons and for cultural reasons, Eisenhower spent his whole career in the segregated U.S. military where black soldiers were treated with the most obvious racism. So Eisenhower comes out of a culture that approves of that kind of thing. And then he had political considerations because he had an election coming up the next year in '56 against Adlai Stevenson. And so it wasn't politically advantageous for Eisenhower to really federalize that whole issue. J. Edgar Hoover was one of the most vicious racists in history. So he had no interest in protecting black people's rights in Mississippi. So you essentially, the bottom line is, without massive demonstrations, civil disobedience by the black community, there would have been no civil rights progress in this country because it wasn't in anybody's interest and power to support civil rights. So that is a tremendous victory that we've won, and I don't think we appreciate it too often.
Can I just add one direct answer to your question, brother, since I was there? They would have been put in double jeopardy since they had been acquitted of murder.
But you know, like I don't mean to take up the whole order, but I heard like some cases, since they don't, like the OJ case, when they couldn't get him in criminal court, they took him to cell court. I was wondering if they changed the venue.
None of that. None of that.
What jury could you get to award damages when they were all rednecks on the jury?
Right. There is a pending investigation to possibly have a trial of other persons, but when you look at it from a legal standpoint, it's really futile and useless because any defendants are extremely elderly. Any witness recollection would be poor, to say the least. So it's really a dead issue.
Next question.
Okay, so my question is, with all the apathy that we display in this city, the brother's talking about the report showing of black men standing up for issues, and we thank you, sisters, that's why we had the Million Man March to thank you. But anyway, what do you think would be the effect if we learn the totality of our history going back at least 4,500 years before the birth of Christ, when we were the supreme people on this earth and gave to the world all civilization that we have now, including the concept of God? What do you think would be the impact of us truly learning our history?
There are things that are facts, and then there are things that are insight, and then there are matters of the will. I know people that know a lot about African history, Egyptology. They're not going to make one iota of difference about the children in Baltimore City Public Schools. They're not going to make any confrontation of racism in society. It's not enough to have knowledge. Knowledge is important. Facts are important. We have to have the will to do something, and we have to have the insight. The insight is most of us are afraid of the white supremacy system that's in place. I'll give you a perfect example. When Schaefer was mayor, people were definitely afraid of him. I know people that said, I'm not going to vote against him, vote for Billy Murphy because he might find out and come down on it, okay? I know people that are scared of the current mayor, okay? They weren't as afraid of Smoke. They would say things against Smoke, not that he's any different politically or whatever, but it's simply the fear imposed on us culturally of white supremacy. And so people were definitely afraid of, you know, I used to call it Master Schaefer, and people got mad with me, okay? And people said, I agree with you, but I can't say it publicly, okay? We still have that fear in us, and it's in us, and that's why our children are mistreated at Hickey, our children are mistreated on Gay Street. We don't do anything, because we're afraid of the system coming down on us.
Well, and let me just add briefly before the next question. You talk about that fear against the black community. I mean, we witnessed, all of us witnessed the murder of Robert Clay. And we witnessed the state medical examiner declare his death a suicide. Now, anybody who knew Robert Clay, even remotely, pretty much realized that that man didn't kill himself. However, it's accepted. It's accepted by the legal system. It's accepted by the government. So that fear that RB is talking about is real. It's serious. And it's existing 2005, 50 years after the murder of Emmett Till. So just to add to what RB was saying, let's go to the next question.
I know you talked about double jeopardy, but by these gentlemen confessing to Look magazine,
We're gentlemen.
well, by these men, confessing to the death of this young boy, couldn't he have been charged, put up on charges of perjury by this government because they confessed? So even though you can't have double jeopardy, you can say that you committed perjury to the court system. So how come nobody ever brought that to?
Good question. And even before, they tried Edgar Ray Killian down in Mississippi for the murders of Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman. And he received, well, he's 80-something years old, confined to a wheelchair, but he'll spend the rest of his life in jail. He was found guilty of manslaughter, I believe.
He's out on appeal.
He's out on appeal, but he was found guilty. Well, I'm just bringing up the point.
But, yes, the double jeopardy is a protection granted to all of us under the United States Constitution, the Fifth Amendment. It swings both ways because you do not want to have the justice system say, okay, we didn't like the decision of the jury. We are a country that is embellished in the jury system, and it's by far the best that there is right now.
But they confessed, so
they did confess. But if I can read to you double jeopardy from the United States Constitution, it says that, nor shall any person be subject for the same offense twice. That very simple means that because they had been tried by a jury of their peers, the 12 white men, the law says that they could not be tried again for murder or kidnapping. It had already been decided that they were not guilty. And with particularly murder, Emmett Till's identification was an issue. Even though his mother said that the ring on his hand clearly identified him as her son, there was no DNA expertise back in 1955 that would assist in that. And even the recent exhuming of Emmett Till's body only confirmed that it was him. But now Bryant and Miller are dead.